Joel Wendt here. This is part of my political blog. Last time I tried to suggest that I was smarter than the average bear in a certain kind of way, and I might know some things that were useful to people. And today I want to demonstrate that right off, because it's kind of a brag in a way to say what I said. And although I did moderate it somewhat in suggesting that the way you get good at these kinds of things is to spend a lot of time thinking about it and studying on it, which I've done. And whether you like what I've said or not, that's up to you. You can read my political stuff in book form or for free on the internet on my website. It's up to you. Anyway, let's try to get at the situation which we're sort of aware of, which is the struggle recently to pass the health care bill in Washington, D.C., and there's a lot of different things that have been said by various people about this, and I want to kind of step back from the situation that takes sides as if there's like a right answer to the health care bill, although everybody certainly should form their opinion about that. I want to look kind of objectively at the process itself that goes on in Washington and talk about it in a way that some people try to get to, but which is not easy to do unless you spend some time thinking about it. One of the things that I recently pointed out with regard to John Farmer's book on The Ground Truth, where he discusses 9/11 and Katrina, is that government is broken. Now, of course, what does that mean? Well, there's a lot of different things it could mean. It depends sort of on the approach you take to it, what you look at, what you sort of expect to see. In this case, I want to expand a little bit on a comment I made, which was to describe Washington, D.C. as a kind of moral swampland. And of course, I don't necessarily mean all the people living there, but I do mean the political activity. And I include in that the members of the Republican and Democratic parties and the lobbyists and all kinds of people who are there. I suppose one way to understand it is to appreciate that the founders were somewhat idealists in a way, at least some of them. They tried to be practical men because they were practical men who lived lives that required them to be practical men. And in a lot of cases they had wives who were also, and even in a more sense, women have to be practical. And sometimes practical means compromise. And so even though you might be an idealist, you don't get what you want. But when they did frame the Constitution of the United States, when they did write the Declaration of Independence, they had in the back of their soul life, you might say, something which has been a little bit warped by people who want to make a particular kind of hay out of it, the people who want to say, well, we're a Christian nation because these things lived in the soul life of the founders. And I think that's just taking advantage of the situation. It's disingenuous. But in any event, you could say that the founders thought of being in public life as involving something of a sacred trust. And they felt this. They didn't just think it as an idea. They felt it, and they tended to share it in common, although they didn't have the same ideas. But they felt this, and it creeps out in their writings in various places, because it was one of those things that fits in with the idea in the Declaration of Independence, which is things that are obviously true. We know these truths to be self-evident. And it was self-evident that governance involved a sacred trust. In part this was so because most of these people had seen the decay that entered into European culture when kings violated their sacred trust and raised their own egocentric self above the people. And that's why the U.S. Constitution begins, "We the people," and all the ideas associated with it. Now that feeling, that deep feeling in the soul for the sacred trust of being in government has disappeared. There are probably, no doubt, a few people who believe it still and who come to politics because they feel that a little bit. But by and large, what we see when we look at the character of the people who exercise power in Washington, D.C., is we see people who are basically addicts, and their addiction is to power. And of all the things that one can be addicted to, the addiction to power is the worst one of all. And because they do have power and they're addicted to power, it's possible to corrupt them. So for lobbyists and commercial interests and other kinds of people who have an agenda and want to get something from those holding political power, there then occurs around these holders of political power, these people addicted to power, and its exercise, a kind of swampland. So you have the general swampland of those who come to Washington attempting to get from what they think is right, and those who live in the swampland are the creatures of the swampland, the politicians who lack a certain degree of character. This is very sad in a way, but also very true, and it's important to understand this because there are certain things we can do once we accept that Washington is a place that fosters corruption of character. Now, one way to understand how to do this is to maybe study a little bit addiction itself, to read about AA or Al-Anon and find out how people in Al-Anon treat addicts, because basically we would get a lot of sound advice for how to treat politicians who are addicted to power. Now, just to give a couple examples that should be real obvious would be Dick Cheney and Job Lieberman. You can get it just by looking at their faces and what they do. They aren't idealists at all. They don't really care about the ideals that they mouth. It's what they can do with their will that's important to them, and that's where the payoff comes, the addictive payoff. One of the first things that we have to do when we deal with an addict is we have to refuse to buy their bullshit. You just cannot believe a politician. Anybody who believes a politician has already fallen off a cliff. And this is true of what happened recently with Obama. People wanted to believe him, and that driver in them enabled Obama to rise to a position of power. And of course, as we were seeing today, he's not what he appeared to be. He doesn't have the character that we put on him, that we wanted him to have. He just doesn't have that character. We can't depend on them. And this was the truth of the book, The Ground Truth. We can't depend on government. We can't depend on politicians. They're too busy taking care of themselves. They're too busy distorting the truth, spinning it to whatever they want it to be. So what do we do? Well, we have to take care of ourselves, and we have to stop enabling politicians. And one of the most concrete things we can do to stop enabling politicians is to churn them the way stockbrokers cause you to churn your stocks in order to make money for themselves. What do I mean? Well, we always vote against the incumbent. That's the main principle. We vote against the incumbent. The incumbent needs to be voted out of office continuously, because that's the only way to break the cycle of his addiction to power, is get him out of office. If he's not there and somebody fresh is there, at least you have the opportunity of somebody who isn't already addicted to power. And of course, the person who's addicted to power will tell you, oh, you have to have me, you have to have me. Look at all the power I have. Get a break. He's into it for himself. He's not into it for you. Wake up.